Welcome, everyone. My name's Jon Clay, VP of Threat Intelligence at Trend Micro, and welcome to our episode 23 of Trend Talks BizSec. Joining me again today is Ed Cabrera, Chief Cybersecurity Officer at Trend Micro. Ed, we got some interesting things to talk about today.
Yeah, definitely. We're going to talk about the SEC and its new ruling. So
Yeah,
great topic
yeah.
today.
On July 26th, the SEC in a 3-2 vote adopted a final rule requiring the disclosure of material cybersecurity incidents and cybersecurity risk management strategies. So let's kind of dive into this stuff. First, who does this affect, Ed?
Well, it affects every publicly traded company, right? And so all of these companies have had to sort of submit and respond to certain requirements around cybersecurity incidents and incident reporting. So that's not necessarily new. What's interesting here is that they've sort of added some additional sort of barriers or guardrails where these companies have to report, and primarily they have to report an incident that is material within 4 days.
So what does material mean, Ed? And you've been in government before, and maybe for some people that don't understand what that means about when it comes to a cybersecurity incident.
Well, material, it's you get all the lawyers in a room and you can come up with terms like material. So they purposely made it vague, right? By what material is. But some of the recommendation or guidelines that they outline or outlined is really talks about just about anything can be seen as a material breach. So some of the things that they talked about is one, does it disrupt or degrade the business's ability to maintain critical operations? Well, every ransomware attack can check that box. Adversely affect the confidentiality, integrity, or availability of information residing on the business's information systems, right? So, wow, that's pretty broad and vague. So just about every breach could cover that. And then lastly is harm to the business or its customers, counterparties, members, registrants, users, or other persons. So again, we're looking at impact, right? You can dove all of those three into one word is impact. And so if the breach itself impacts the publicly traded company, then they have to then start reporting.
Right. So some examples is if, like you said, in a ransomware attack where they take down critical systems that run the operations, day-to-day operations of the organization, that would be material. If they steal customer data, that would be material. If they, for example, maybe they are a supply chain, have a part of their supply chain gets affected to this, that could then be material. All of those, right? So making it somewhat vague, I think, does bring into play that a lot of these breaches are going to end up having to be disclosed. And so I think they mentioned a 4-day disclosure. Is that right, Ed?
That's correct. Yep.
But not from discovery, right?
No. I think the unique difference here is it's from the point where the company is able to ascertain the materiality, right? So it's not necessarily once they identified that an incident has occurred. It's when they've done their investigations to find out that it's a material breach.
And they deem it material at that point, right?
Yeah.
Now there was a clause about an extension, right?
Yeah, as long as, well, there could be an extension given, but it's not like other ones that we've seen before. This has to and only can be provided by the U.S. Attorney General. And so that seems very vague and process wise on how they would get to the U.S. Attorney General, right? There's got to be a lot of layers to get to the U.S. Attorney General to be able to make that decision. So they're not really clear on what that process would be. Traditionally,
well, I'm curious, Ed, you worked at the U.S. Secret Service, right? And so you had to deal with the U.S. Attorney General, I'm assuming in a number of cases you dealt with. I kind of laughed when I said that, when I saw that, because I'm like, it probably takes more than 4 days just to get access to the Attorney General. I mean,
They make it clear here where it's the Attorney General when there is a risk to public harm or a national security event or national security incident. So
Right.
there could be, well, back up to what your question is. Traditionally, doing law enforcement work at the federal level, you're not dealing with the Attorney General. You're dealing with the Department of Justice. You're the U.S. Attorney's Office and the assistant U.S. attorneys that are handling the cases and investigations. So that's the level that you're dealing with. Now, on the classified side of the house, yeah, the Attorney General is in this sort of process chain, and it's really one example that I can think of that's pretty relevant now in the topics in current events is through the FISA process, right? Meaning where only the Attorney General has to be or can only sign off on these warrants on the national security side. It's all been in the news. But anyways, so the Attorney General to be in this process, yes, you can only assume that it's reporting into the FBI and or the FBI is reporting it to the publicly traded company. Remember, a lot of these events, still are being reported to these organizations by law enforcement. Right. And if it's a national security event, it's going to be reported by CISA or FBI, to the actual organization. And so some of this stuff might be already kicked off on a process piece, but it's an interesting exclusion that they put in here.
I think, obviously SEC deals with the public companies and they're all publicly traded on stock exchanges. And so they're probably more worried about stock manipulation, stock, going up or down because of this. Investors have to understand it. Does this event is going to affect their stock price? Because they want to know, is your stock going up? Is it going to go down? Right? Because that could happen. Now, obviously, over the years, we haven't seen a whole lot of where breaches that really affect the stock price. I mean, maybe there's a dip for a momentary time, but I tell you, I can't remember too many companies where their stock price in the long term dropped dramatically because of an incident, a cyber incident. Usually it's not a big deal, right?
All of that is temporal, right? So what we've seen in the past, that if there's been a cyber incident and or issue, an attack, a breach, or whatever comes out in the news, there is an impact to the stock price, but it doesn't seem like it lasts very long. Right. Now the question is for how long, or as we get to see a lot more sort of impactful breaches. So I wonder if that will change in the future, if we'll see a degradation there. And obviously this speaks to that, right? A change in reporting and making it that much more part of the governance piece makes you wonder, will it be much more of an issue to shareholders and stock prices?
Yeah, and I think, moving from disruptive to destructive attacks, especially if, for example, if they don't pay a ransom or don't pay an extortion fee, maybe they'll, these actors will do more of a destructive, and that could obviously cause massive issues for the organization. And let's talk about kind of the three top takeaways. I know this is a very long document the SEC put out there, and there's a lot of, as you say, lawyer speak in there. But what are the top three takeaways from this reporting?
Well, I would say the top three is one, just about every breach that we hear about in the news is material. So it affects all publicly traded companies. I think it also, the other takeaway is that, I mean, you really have to start, and it's required now, being much more diligent in the reporting of your cyber risk programs, and not only the processes, but how it's evolved, and it's this continuous reporting, which is, I think, a key takeaway. I think the one thing that is now, it's really seems like it's becoming more tightly coupled with enterprise risk management. Cyber risk management is really, getting up there on the reporting side, right? And so I think that's the other takeaway. And the other takeaway is that you have this sort of ripple effect. What other sort of regulatory bodies will begin, adopting similar rule changes, right? That will affect publicly.
Well, this is a
companies.
U.S. one, right? So it'll be interesting if other countries, similar organizations take this same thing and follow this kind of rule exactly, right?
Exactly. Last year we had Dora come out of the EU, really speaking to resiliency. The Bank of England talking about operational resiliency and their operational resiliency policy for the financial sector. So you really start seeing these sort of this evolution of not only are they all seeing cyber as the main risk they have to deal with, but it's also what are the regulatory sort of requirements are they putting on organizations to be able to respond and report
Right.
on these?
Well, two things that I saw that were interesting. One is the annual updates that they have to deliver. You mentioned continuous monitoring, but in this case, they only have to do once a year. They're going to have to prove that what have they done to minimize the risk of a breach, right?
No, absolutely. And I think this also really reports to that the executive management has to be able to, one, know what they're talking about, right? And so we've been talking about the requirement of having, not in this particular policy per se, but the sense that this sort of trend of making sure you have somebody on your board that has experience and a background in cybersecurity, former CISOs, government officials, somebody that is there to speak at the board level on cybersecurity. So this is really, this sort of evolution and impact level. And then it trickles
What's
down to
interesting,
management.
yeah, what's interesting, Ed, is they didn't go that far, though. They did not say that you have to have somebody on the board that has cybersecurity experience. But what they are saying is that your executive team does have to have some of this expertise, right?
Exactly. And not just, and then that you basically know how to assess your risk, right? So
Right.
it's not just, hey, I read a book or anything else like that, but somebody in your management staff, your chief risk officer, your chief information security officer, which is almost like a given nowadays, but I think we're going to have this sort of evolution where you have chief risk officers in the financial sector, but I think this is going to start to grow where you're going to see a higher level sort of focus and requirement of executive management teams to have that capability, right? Not just have the programs in place and the technology in place, but it's also having the people behind the scenes that know what they're talking about.
Well, and what's interesting, Ed, is I think, we're seeing an evolution in cybersecurity industry right now to a shift to attack surface risk management. And this is just perfect timing for this because this is exactly what these businesses are going to have to deal with. They're going to have to first discover all of their different devices and accounts and then assess the risk of all of these, right? And then once you know the risk level of all these things, now you can put in mitigating factors, mitigating controls in order to minimize the risk. So I think this shift to attack surface risk management from the old traditional where, hey, let's just block a threat here, let's block a threat there, that's out the door anymore, especially with the sophistication of these adversaries that we're dealing with today, and especially in the financial industry because they want money, right? That's what most of these adversaries want. They want a profit, they want money. So going after the financial industry is huge. Any business that has, publicly traded, they're probably a quite large organization, lots of revenue. We've even seen in the ransomware attacks where they look at revenue and tie the ransom to how the percentage of their annual revenues.
No, absolutely. So, I mean, obviously, publicly traded companies being large in nature and obviously have sort of make great targets, so to speak. But I think what's really important is that, yeah, they have to evolve in this continuous sort of continuous risk assessment and continuous risk management is critical, right? So you really we started with the idea of continuous diagnostic and mitigation that came out of the federal government for federal government agencies to really understand on a continuous basis. And then they put out CISA put out a binding directive on reporting, right? Requiring within 72 hours reporting critical vulnerabilities and being able to understand the impact, right? So prioritizing also those vulnerabilities. So there is this sort of push and move and maturation.
Yep.
And I think it's well suited because, it's really this convergence of security operations to risk operations or to GRC in general, right? So GRC, from that perspective, very static, once a year, like you mentioned, reporting on your programs that you have in existence and how they are working effectively. But now we're going to get to, no, we need to do this, in a continuous manner, right? We need to constantly be able to assess our risk at any moment in time, to do it accurately, and to be able to prioritize and remediate accordingly.
Yeah. Yeah. So all good stuff, Ed. I think we're about wrapped up here. Everybody, thanks for joining us on episode 23, where we discussed the SEC report that just came out, the ruling. Future episodes, just give you some quick heads up. We're going to talk about some of these new generative AI tools that are being offered in the malicious undergrounds. And then we're also going to try to have a guest speaker from Interpol in the upcoming episode. So keep tuned for those. Ed, thanks for the talk today. I thought we had a great one.
Likewise, great topics as always, and looking forward to these others.
Yeah, exactly. So stay tuned for those. Everybody have a great rest of your day. Stay safe and have a good day. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.